Histories of giants appear across 12 different countries, separated by oceans and millennia. In theory, this should merely be universal folklore, the kind of myth that arises from humanity's need to explain large bones of extinct animals, or to instill fear of distant enemies. The problem begins when folklore starts to rhyme with physical evidence. Stonehenge, with 25-ton blocks transported over 240 kilometers. The pyramids of Giza, with 3 million blocks fitted with millimeter precision. Baalbek in Lebanon, where 800-ton stones were cut, moved, and stacked without cranes, without wheels, without any definitive explanation. This isn't proof of Nephilim. It's something more dangerous, a pattern that raises questions that conventional archaeology prefers not to voice. Today, we will chart a map without fantasy and without haste, ancient text, megalith, fitting, logistics, and the exact point where simple explanations stop working. If you want to understand how texts from 3,000 years ago connect to 40-ton stones scattered across the planet, without conspiracy theories and without academic naivety, subscribe now. Here, we don't sell ready-made answers. We build the chain of evidence and let you decide. So what exactly will you discover in the next few minutes? First, how 12 ancient cultures, without documented contact among themselves, describe the same thing using different words. Second, what the texts really say when you peel away the surface reading and delve into linguistics and historical context. Third, the point where modern engineering looks at ancient megaliths and says, technically possible, but improbably efficient with the suggested means. And in the end, you'll have tools to answer 3 shortcut-free questions. Is this collective memory, religious propaganda, or a record of something that existed and was consciously forgotten? Why did these narratives survive when 90% of ancient literature has been lost? And why did the places where these stories are strongest coincide precisely with the largest megalithic constructions in the world? Let's start from a point that is undisputed. The texts exist. Genesis 6 mentions Nephilim before the flood. Numbers 13 mentions Nephilim after the flood. The Book of Enoch, non-canonical for Christians but preserved by Ethiopian Jews, expands the story. 200 angels descend Mount Hermon, copulate with humans, and generate giants. Deuteronomy 3 speaks of Og, king of Bashan, whose iron bed measured 4 meters in length. The Septuagint translates Nephilim as giants. The Latin Vulgate maintains giants. Josephus, a Jewish historian of the 1st century, wrote that giant bones were still being displayed in his time. What does this prove? Nothing yet. It proves that the tradition exists. It proves it was taken seriously enough to be copied, translated, debated. It proves someone, at some time, believed it was worth documenting. But text is not physical evidence. Text can be metaphor, propaganda, theology. So the question shifts. If it's metaphor, why is it so specific? Why mention Og's bed and provide exact measurements? Why does the Book of Enoch choose Mount Hermon, a real place you can visit today, instead of a generic hill? And if it is propaganda, propaganda for what? Who gains power by claiming that giants existed? Here lies the first contradiction. If Nephilim are an allegory for powerful men, why does Numbers 13 mention them as something physically intimidating that made 10 of the 12 Hebrew spies retreat in fear? Why use giants if the issue was merely political strength? On the flip side, if they are literal, how does a population of giants disappear without leaving identifiable skeletons cataloged by museums? Large human bones exist, cases of gigantism from pituitary dysfunction, but none come close to 4 meters. None show an entire population, a lineage, only rare individuals. So one of 2 things must be true. Either archaeology has yet to find them, possible but unlikely after 200 years of intensive excavation in the Levant, or the texts exaggerate dimensions, common in ancient literature, where giant can mean very tall or dominant. Or, third option, the bones were destroyed, lost, or misidentified. Let's test the third hypothesis. In 1950, excavations in Gargano, Italy, found anomalous human bones. Tibias measuring 60 centimeters, suggesting a height above 3 meters, a rare case, but documented. In 1895, miners in County Antrim, Ireland, unearthed a skeleton measuring 7 meters. Photographed, displayed, subsequently vanished. In 1911, a skeleton of 5 meters was found in Lovelock Cave, Nevada, USA, associated with the Paiute tribe, which has oral legends about red-haired giants inhabiting the region. The skeleton went to a museum, then it disappeared. Here enters a disturbing pattern. Anomalous finds that are photographed, reported, but not preserved or accessible for modern verification. This, of course, fuels conspiracy theories. But it also raises a methodological question. Why did 19th century and early 20th century science lack the strict protocols we have today? Why were so many finds treated as curiosities instead of systematic evidence? Is this scientific neglect or something more deliberate? The honest answer is, we don't know. What we do know is that Victorian archaeology was a blend of science and treasure hunting. Objects were collected, catalogued poorly, sold, local museums closed, private collections were dispersed. There was no DNA, no carbon-14 dating until 1949. So much was lost due to incompetence, not conspiracy. But that doesn't change the fact that to verify the giant hypothesis, we would need bones. And the bones that should exist are either no longer there or were never adequately documented. So text alone is insufficient. Bones, if they existed, have vanished or are too rare. What remains? Megaliths. And this is where things become concrete. Because stones weighing 70, 100, 800 tons do not vanish. They are right there. And they raise questions that don't have easy answers. Let's go to Baalbek, Lebanon. 3 limestone blocks called the Trilithon weigh about 800 tons each. Cut from a quarry 800 meters away, transported, lifted, and fitted 6 meters high, forming part of the base of the Temple of Jupiter. Conventional dating places these stones in the Roman era, but Romans left inscriptions. These stones have none, and the style of cutting does not match the known Roman standard. So the hypothesis arises that the Romans built on a much older foundation, Phoenician or earlier. The logistics problem is this. To move 800 tons, you would need the equivalent force of 40 Sauerzuhren men pulling ropes, or 800 oxen, or a system of levers and sledges that no one has ever successfully replicated on a large scale. The largest stone moved by humans in modern times without machinery was the Thunderstone in Russia. 500 tons, moved by 400 men using bronze rails in the 18th century. An extraordinary engineering operation that nearly failed. And that with metal technology, pulleys, and detailed planning. Baalbek was built without iron in industrial quantities, without wheels, because wheels do not support 800 tons, without any complex documented pulleys. So how? The conventional explanation is coordinated brute force, unlimited time, and lever and rolling techniques that haven't survived in the historical record. Plausible. But is it the complete answer? Or is it the answer that allows us to close the book and move on? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Baalbek is not a unique case. In Ollantaytambo, Peru, blocks weighing 50 tons were moved across mountainous terrain. In Pumapunku, Bolivia, andesite blocks, extremely hard rock, were cut with precision to less than 1 millimeter variation, something that requires advanced cutting tools, possibly diamond or an equivalent. Official dating is 536-600 AD, civilization Tiwanaku. But the Tiwanaku had no iron. They had bronze, stone, obsidian. How do you cut andesite with bronze? You don't. You wear it down, and where it leaves different cutting marks. Here comes Giza. The pyramids of Egypt are generally seen as solved, ramps, ropes, organized labor. But the largest pyramids, especially Khufu's, Cheops, have internal blocks weighing 5 tons, and ceiling blocks of the king's chamber weighing 70 tons. The precision of alignment is to 1/15 of a degree. The alignment with true north is nearly perfect, and construction would have taken 20 years according to Herodotus. This means placing a 5-ton block every 5 minutes, 10 hours a day, nonstop, for 20 years. Is that possible? Technically, yes. Improbable? Also, yes. And this assumes that logistics were perfect. Extraction, transport, polishing, placement with no errors, no delays. It's like assuming that a modern production line operates without technical failure for 2 decades. It could happen. But it's strange. And here comes the global pattern. Stonehenge in England. Sarsen stones weighing up to 25 tons, brought from Marlborough Downs, 30 kilometers to the north. Smaller stones, from Bluestone, came from Preseli Hills in Wales, 240 kilometers away, dating places construction between 3000 and 2000 BC, Neolithic. Without metal, without wheels. The explanation is that wooden sledges, plant fiber ropes, and hundreds of people were used. Plausible. But why bring stones from 240 kilometers away when local stone is available? The academic answer is ritual significance. The stones from Preseli held symbolic importance. Okay, but that still doesn't explain how Neolithic populations, without writing, without formal mathematics, managed to coordinate the transport of 80 stones over rough terrain and rivers, and then lift them in a precise astronomical circle. And it's not just Europe and the Middle East. Nan Madol in Micronesia, built between 1200 and 1600 AD on a coral reef with basalt blocks weighing up to 50 tons, transported from nearby islands, without metal, without draft animals. Mohenjo-Daro in Pakistan, 2500 BC, with a sewage system and urban planning that doesn't appear again until the Roman Empire. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, 9600 BC, older than Stonehenge by 6,000 years, with T-shaped stone pillars weighing 10 to 20 tons, adorned with animals, erected by hunter-gatherers who theoretically had no agriculture, no complex social hierarchy, and no reason to invest so much work in monumental construction. So here's the map. 12 countries, 12 cultures, 12 different epochs. In the same pattern, megaliths that challenge the expected logistics for the documented technology of the time. Does this prove Nephilim? No, but it proves that there's something wrong with the model. Either the chronology is wrong, or the technology available was more advanced than we thought. Or there was a transfer of knowledge between cultures that shouldn't have had contact. Or, fourth option, something was forgotten. And here we loop back to the texts. Because the cultures that built these megaliths also preserved legends of giants. The Greeks had the Titans and the giants who fought against the Olympian gods. The Norse had the Jotun, giants of ice and fire. The Aztecs had the Quinametsin, giants who lived in earlier ages. The Paiute, in the USA, had the Siteka, red-haired cannibal giants. The Maori, in New Zealand, spoke of giants who built stone fortifications. And the Sumerians, the oldest written culture in the world, mentioned the Anunnaki, beings who descended from the sky and taught agriculture, metallurgy, astronomy. Coincidence? Collective memory of a real event? Or universal narrative structure appearing because humans, anywhere, create stories of others more powerful to explain ancient ruins that they themselves cannot replicate? The honest answer is, we don't know. But we do know there are 3 layers here. The first layer, megaliths exist and are hard to fully explain. The second layer, ancient texts from multiple cultures mention giants. The third layer, there is geographic overlap between megaliths and narratives of giants. Baalbek is close to Mount Hermon, where Enoch says the angels descended. Stonehenge is in England, where local legends speak of giants who built the stones. Göbekli Tepe is in the Mesopotamian region, where the Anunnaki were worshipped. Nan Madol has legends of gods or spirits who helped in its construction. This is still not proof, but it is a pattern, and patterns require explanation. So, what is the explanation? Let's eliminate the weaker ones first. Alien theory. Unlikely, as there's no evidence of extraterrestrial technology, nanomaterials, impossible alloys, anomalous isotopes. Atlantis theory. Unlikely, as there's no evidence of a lost global civilization with writing, advanced metallurgy, and intercontinental navigation before 10,000 BC. Archaeological conspiracy theory. Unlikely, as archaeologists from 50 different countries with different funding and ideologies could not coordinate a cover-up for 200 years. So what remains? 3 hypotheses still stand. First, ancient techniques were much more sophisticated than we imagine, and were lost because they were not recorded in writing or were recorded in perishable materials, wood, papyrus, leather, that decomposed. Second, there was knowledge transfer between cultures through trade routes and migration that we underestimate, and this explains the similarities. Third, the texts about giants are distorted memories of encounters between populations with significant physical differences. For example, Homo sapiens encountering Neanderthals or Denisovans, who were more robust, or meeting populations with endemic gigantism. Each of these hypotheses has its pros and cons. The first hypothesis, lost techniques, is supported by the fact that many ancient technologies were forgotten: Roman concrete, Damascus steel, Greek fire, and only rediscovered centuries later. The second, knowledge transfer, is supported by recent archaeological finds, such as traces of coca, a South American plant, in Egyptian mummies, or medieval maps showing coastlines that were only officially discovered in the 15th century. The third, memory of encounters with hominins, is supported by genetics. Modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA, 1 to 4%, and Denisovan DNA, up to 6% in Oceanian populations. But none of these 3 hypotheses completely eliminates the possibility that something else occurred. And this is where the debate stalls. To move forward, we need new evidence. And new evidence means excavations in unexplored sites, analysis of ancient DNA, dating through multiple methods, and, most importantly, a willingness to revise established chronologies when the data doesn't fit, and the data doesn't always fit. Göbekli Tepe forced archaeology to push back the date of the Neolithic Revolution by 6 years. Before Göbekli, the theory was agriculture, settlement, organized religion, monumental construction. Göbekli reversed that. Monumental construction, organized religion, settlement, agriculture. This changes everything. Because if hunter-gatherers could organize work on a scale to erect stone temples, what else could they have done that we still don't know? So the question isn't, did Nephilim exist? The question is, what exactly happened 6, 0, 8, 10,000 years ago that left such large marks that we are still trying to understand? And why did the cultures that followed feel the need to explain these marks with stories of giants? Because here's the point. If you are a farmer in 2000 BC, looking at Stonehenge or Göbekli Tepe, you don't know who built that. Your grandmother doesn't know. Your grandmother's grandmother doesn't know. So you create a story. And the story you create is, it was the giants. Why? Because no one alive can do that. So it must have been someone bigger, stronger, more powerful. It's logical. It's rational. It's the best explanation available with the information you have. And then that story gets passed down. And it gets written. And it becomes sacred text. And 4 more years later, here we are, trying to separate what is memory from what is myth. And perhaps, just perhaps, the line between memory and myth is thinner than we think. Mount Hermon rests on the border between Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, rising 814 meters above sea level. At the top, the ruins of Roman temples. At the base, remnants of ancient settlements. And in the Book of Enoch, a apocryphal text preserved by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. It is precisely here that 200 angels, led by Semyaza, descend and make a pact. We will intermingle with human women. The text is specific. It doesn't just say a mountain. It says Hermon. Why? If it's allegorical, why anchor it in real geography? And if it's theological propaganda, what's the gain in selecting a mountain that any reader of the time could visit and verify that nothing supernatural was there? The simplest answer is that Hermon had religious significance before Enoch was written. It was a site of Canaanite worship, later Phoenician, then Greco-Roman. So the author of Enoch took a place that was already considered sacred and used it as a backdrop for his story. This is a common narrative technique, but it doesn't explain why the story caught on. Why did Enoch, non-canonical for rabbinic Jews and Catholics, survive in copies in Ethiopia and get cited in the Epistle of Jude in the New Testament? Why has a text that most theologians dismiss as uninspired continued to be copied, translated, and debated? Because it answers a question that Genesis 6 leaves open. Who were the sons of God? Genesis states that they saw the daughters of men were beautiful and took wives for themselves, and that Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. 3 words in Hebrew, vegam acharei ken, and also afterward. After what? After the flood? So if the flood killed everyone except Noah and his family, how do the Nephilim show up again? 3 possible interpretations. First, sons of God means men from the lineage of Seth, and daughters of men means descendants of Cain. The problem with this reading is that it forces the language. In biblical Hebrew, B'nai Elohim, and sons of God, appears in Job 1:6 and Job 38 or 7, clearly referring to celestial beings, not humans. So why change the meaning only in Genesis 6? Second interpretation, sons of God are angels, literally. This creates a huge theological problem for Jews and Christians because angels are spirits. How do spirits reproduce? The traditional answer from those defending a literal reading is they incarnated temporarily in physical bodies. But this raises another question. If angels can do that, why only once? Why aren't there continuous reports of angels incarnating and procreating throughout history? The third interpretation, sons of God were human rulers, kings, or aristocrats who claimed divine descent, common in the ancient Middle East, pharaohs, Mesopotamian kings. They took women by force, created dynasties, and these dynasties produced lineages of mighty men, the Gibborim, who were then labeled Nephilim through cultural exaggeration. This reading is the most accepted by academia, as it resolves the problem without resorting to the supernatural, but it also has weaknesses. If Nephilim are just a metaphor for tyrants, why does Numbers 13 mention them as something physically terrifying? The 12 spies sent by Moses to scout Canaan return, saying they saw Nephilim and that they felt like grasshoppers next to them. Hyperbolic language? Possible. But why use Nephilim specifically and not warriors or giant soldiers? Why connect back to Genesis 6? Here enters Og. Deuteronomy 3:11 states that Og, king of Bashan, was the last of the Rephaim. His iron bed measured 9 cubits in length and 4 in width. 1 cubit is approximately 45 centimeters. So we're talking about a bed measuring 4 meters in length by 1, 8 meters in width. This is not metaphor. It is a physical description of an object that, according to the text, still existed and could be seen in Rabbah of the Ammonites. Ogi is not an allegory. He appears in historical narratives, the conquest of Canaan, as a king defeated by Israel. The region of Bashan is identified with modern Golan in northern Israel and southern Syria. Thus, he is treated as a historical figure. But 4 meters? Is that biologically viable? Yes and no. The tallest human ever accurately measured was Robert Wadlow, 2, 72 meters. He died at 22 from complications related to gigantism, acromegaly. The taller a human is, the more pressure is exerted on bones, heart, and joints. A human of 4 meters would have great difficulty walking. So either Og wasn't 4 meters tall, and the bed was exaggerated for propaganda, he was biologically different from modern humans, or the text means something else. Some scholars suggest that the bed was actually a ceremonial sarcophagus, or a votive bed offered in a temple, exaggerated for ritual purpose. But the text says iron bed. Iron in the late Bronze Age, the time of Moses, approx. 1400 BC, was rare, valuable, imported. So mentioning iron is not a detail to overlook. It is a marker of luxury and power. Why invent this if the story is already established? Let's return to the global pattern. Why is Bashan, where Og ruled, called the land of the Rephaim? Rephaim appear in Genesis 14, Genesis 15, Deuteronomy 2, Deuteronomy 3, and Joshua 12. They are always described as an ancient people, powerful, of elevated stature. Some Ugaritic texts, Canaan, 1400, 1200 BC, mention Rephaim as ancestral spirits or dead heroes. So Rephaim could be a dual term, both ethnic and religious, a real people in a mythical category. But if the Rephaim were just a tall ethnic group like the Tutsis of Rwanda, who have an average height of 185 meters, why does the Bible treat them as something exceptional? The conventional answer is that the average height in the Bronze Age was 60 meters for men. So someone 90 meters or 2 meters would be seen as a giant. That makes sense, but it still doesn't explain the 4-meter bed, unless the bed is symbolic or the measurement was corrupted in the transmission of the text. Let's look at the linguistics. The Hebrew word for Nephilim is Nephilim, Nephilim, derived from the root Nepal, Nafal, which means to fall. Thus, Nephilim can be translated to the fallen, or those who make fall, but warriors who topple enemies. The Greek Septuagint translates it to Gygades, giants, but the original Greek word for giant, like the giants from Greek mythology, also carries the sense of born of the earth, to earth, gignestai, prakos, to be born. So there are layers of meaning: fallen, warriors, large, born of the earth. This opens the possibility that Nephilim could have been a title, not a physical description. Like Titan can mean literally large or metaphorically powerful. But here lies the problem. If it is just metaphor, why do cultures without contact use the same metaphor? Why do Greeks have titans and giants, Norse have Jotun, Hindus have Daityas and Danavas, giants who fight against gods, and all describe these beings as builders of great works, dominators of humans, and defeated by gods or heroes? Joseph Campbell, a mythologist, would argue that this is a universal archetype, the monster that precedes civilization and is defeated by the cultural hero. Carl Jung would say it is a structure of the collective unconscious, the dangerous other that threatens order. But this is still a psychological explanation, not a historical one. It doesn't explain why the archetype is so consistent, geographically and chronologically, and it doesn't explain the megaliths, because if giants are just psychological metaphor, why does the metaphor appear exactly in places where there are real megalithic constructions that require strength or technology beyond the norm? Let's return to Baalbek. The quarry from which the trilithon blocks were cut still exists, and there lies the largest stone cut by humans that has never been moved, Hajar al-Hibla, the pregnant woman's stone. It weighs about 1 tons, cut, prepared, but left in the quarry. Why? The conventional explanation is that the project was abandoned. But why? Lack of resources? Change of regime? Or because someone realized midway through the work that it was not feasible to move that stone? Here's the practical test. If Romans could move 800 tons, why couldn't they move 100? Is the difference of 200 tons enough to break the system? Or was it never a Roman project, but rather Phoenician or earlier, with Romans only building on top? Archaeological dating of Baalbek is difficult because the site has been used continuously for 3,000 years. Phoenicians, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs. So there are overlapping layers. The megalithic base has no inscription. The Roman structures above do. This suggests that the foundation is pre-Roman. But how much? We don't know. It could be from 1 BC. It could be from 2 BC. Without organic dating, wood, bone, in the joints of the stones, there's no way of knowing for sure. And here lies the frustration of the scientific method. When there is insufficient evidence, science says we don't know and stops. But humans don't like we don't know. So they fill the void with speculation. And speculation becomes alternative theory. And alternative theory becomes movement. And movement becomes polarization. Science versus hidden truth. But this dichotomy is false, because science is not the enemy of mystery. Science is the method of investigating mystery. The problem arises when science closes questions prematurely out of institutional discomfort. For example, Göbekli Tepe was ignored for 40 years, discovered in 1963 but treated as a medieval cemetery. Only in 1994 did Klaus Schmidt realize what it was. Why? Because the idea that hunter-gatherers from 600 BC constructed stone temples didn't fit the model, so it was easier to ignore it, until it couldn't be ignored anymore. Today, Göbekli Tepe forced a reassessment of Neolithic chronology. Tomorrow, what else will force a revision? What other sites are being overlooked because the interpretation doesn't fit? Nan Madol in Micronesia is another case. Built between 1200 and 1600 AD, with basalt blocks weighing up to 50 tons, on an artificial coral reef. The local legend says it was built by twin gods who made the stones fly. Folklore, of course, but why fly? Why not roll or push? The answer is that flying resolves the logistical problem that ordinary humans can't solve. So the myth offers what the rational explanation cannot. A complete answer, and this is important, because myth is not lie. Myth is a narrative that preserves information in an emotional, symbolic way when technical information is lost. If you are an oral culture with no writing, how do you pass knowledge forward? Through story. And the story that sticks is the one with drama, gods, heroes, monsters, giants. So maybe, just maybe, the giants are the way ancient cultures found to say, there was someone here before us who did things we don't know how to do. Now let's test something. Let's take the 12 regions with megaliths and giant narratives and see if there's a temporal pattern. Göbekli Tepe, 9600 BC. Pyramids of Giza, 2560 BC. Stonehenge, 2000 BC. Baalbek, 1000 BC. Possible but controversial. Pumapunku, 536 AD. Nan Madol, 1200 AD. Mohenjo-Daro, 2500 BC. Machu Picchu, 1450 AD. Newgrange, Ireland, 3200 BC. Karnak, France, 4500 BC. Teotihuacan, Mexico, 100 AD. Derinkuyu, Turkey, uncertain date, possibly 1400 BC. What do we see? There is no concentration in one epoch. It ranges from 9600 BC to 1450 AD. This destroys the lost global civilization hypothesis akin to Atlantis, because if there had been an advanced global civilization in 10 Zoroastrian BC, it would have left more evidence of contact, not isolated constructions in different eras. But there is another pattern. Many of these constructions are in areas of climatic or geological transition, near rivers, mountains, coasts, strategic places for trade, defense, resources. So it's possible that megaliths are simply markers of power. We control this place, and we prove this by building something no one else can. It's propaganda, it's intimidation, it's monument. But propaganda doesn't explain everything, because propaganda needs an audience. If you erect Stonehenge to impress neighboring tribes, fine. But why bring stones from 240 kilometers away? Why not use local stone and save labor? Unless the transport itself is part of the ritual. Unless the suffering and effort are the point. Unless the stone itself has sacred significance. And here we return to the religious. Because religion is the only force, historically, that causes populations to invest absurd amounts of work in projects with no immediate material payoff. Medieval cathedrals took centuries to build. Generations died without seeing the end. Why? For God. For salvation. For community. Neolithic megaliths might be the same, non-utilitarian, but necessary to the symbolic cosmos of that culture. If you want to know what I think, and here I step out of neutrality for a moment, I think the answer is mixture. I think giants were simultaneously a metaphor for power, memory of tall or robust populations, and a religious narrative to explain megaliths. I think texts like Enoch and Genesis 6 took ancient oral traditions, mixed them with theology, and produced a hybrid that is neither pure history nor pure fiction. It's something in between. And that is uncomfortable because we want clean answers. But the past is not clean. Now, I want to hear you. Do you read Genesis 6 and Nephilim as metaphor, historical memory, or mixture? And why? Leave your thoughts in the comments. This isn't a theological test. It's genuine curiosity about how you process ancient information when evidence is incomplete. So where does this leave us? We have texts that say one thing. We have megaliths that suggest unexpected technical capacity. We have global legends that rhyme for no apparent reason. And we have three possibilities that we have not managed to eliminate. One, ancient cultures were technologically more advanced than we assume, and we lost that knowledge. Two, there was contact and knowledge transfer between separated cultures through routes we haven't mapped yet. Three, something happened. An event, a population, a change that left such a mark that it became myth, and myth became text. And text survived because it touched on something true, even if distorted. Which of these three is most likely? It depends on what you accept as evidence. If you only accept bones and DNA, none of them is proven. If you accept megaliths as indirect evidence of technical capacity, the first hypothesis gains strength. If you accept cultural patterns as evidence of contact, the second gains strength. If you accept ancient texts as preservation of real memory, even if exaggerated, the third gains strength. But here's the problem. You don't have to choose just one, because reality is often layers. Perhaps techniques were lost, and there was contact, and there were events that became myths, all at once. And we, 4,000 years later, are trying to unravel the thread with missing strands. So it's not just about, did Nephilim exist, yes or no? It's about, what exactly are these texts and these stones telling us when we stop forcing them to say what we want to hear? Because giants, literal or metaphorical, are not the real question. The real question is, why have we forgotten so much? Why didn't medieval Europe know how to make Roman concrete? Why were metallurgy techniques lost and rediscovered? Why do ancient maps show coastlines that should not have been known? It's not conspiracy. It's the fragility of knowledge. It's the fact that if you don't write, don't teach, don't replicate, information dies in a generation. And perhaps the Nephilim, whoever they are simply the name we gave to what was forgotten. So let's close the loops. Let's return to the three promises made at the beginning. How 12 cultures without contact ended up describing the same thing, what the texts actually say when you go deep, and where modern engineering admits it doesn't have a full answer. Let's deliver that now. First delivery. The global pattern is not coincidence, but it's also not proof of direct contact. It's something subtler. It's narrative convergence under similar cultural pressures. All these cultures face the same problem. They found ruins, megaliths, or remnants of something older that they could not replicate. And they all needed an explanation. The most psychologically efficient explanation is, it was beings larger and stronger. Because that closes the question without humiliating the present culture. It's not, we are incompetent. It's, they were superhuman. This preserves pride and solves the mystery at the same time. But convergence doesn't erase the possibility of real memory, because some of these narratives are too specific to be merely archetypal. The Greeks don't just say, there were giants. They say the giants were born from the blood of Uranus, that they were defeated at Phlegra, and that some were buried under volcanoes, and volcanic eruptions were interpreted as the giants trying to escape. This is not vague archetype. It's geography, geology, and an attempt to explain natural phenomenon. So the Greek myth of giants might be, at the same time, a memory of a robust population, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and an etiological narrative for volcanoes. Similarly, Genesis 6 does not say there were giants in the world. It says Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward. Why the temporal precision? Why separate before the flood and after the flood? If it's just allegory for tyranny, it doesn't need that division. But if it's memory of something that was interrupted, the flood, and then resurfaced, migration, remaining lineage, the phrase makes sense. So the text preserves the structure of a historical event, even if the details are theological. Second delivery, what the texts actually say. Genesis 6, 1-4 says that sons of God saw that daughters of men were beautiful, took wives, and bore Nephilim, the Gibberim, mighty warriors. The term Nephilim comes from Naphil, to fall. So it can mean the fallen or those who make fall. The Septuagint translates it to giants, but that might be interpretation, not a literal translation. Numbers 13:33 says that the Hebrew spies saw Nephilim in Canaan and felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Deuteronomy 2 and 3 mention Rephaim, Anakim, descendants of Anak, and Og. Joshua 11 states that Joshua exterminated the Anakim from Hebron, Debir, and other cities, but some remained in Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And 1 Samuel 17 mentions Goliath from Gath. At 2, 9 meters tall, if the measurement is correct. So the texts don't say mythical giants of 10 meters. And they say very tall men, formidable warriors, from specific lineages, concentrated in specific regions. This is compatible with populations that had a taller average height, due to genetics, nutrition, or both, which were mythified over time. But it's also compatible with cultural exaggeration, where very tall becomes giant, becomes Nephilim, becomes son of an angel. The Book of Enoch goes further. It states that the 200 angels taught humans metallurgy, astrology, magic, and warfare, and that the Nephilim born from this union consumed human resources, created chaos, and forced God to send the flood. Enoch is much more dramatic than Genesis, and it's not canonical, but it has been preserved, cited, and was influential. Why? Because it offers a complete narrative where Genesis provides a fragment. Humans prefer complete narratives, even if they are not authorized. Now, the most important, Enoch may be theologically wrong and still preserve real cultural memory. It may be that there was, in fact, transfer of technology, metallurgy, astronomy, between populations, and this was interpreted as angels teaching humans. It may be that there was, in fact, conflict between groups with different technologies, and the losing side was demonized as children of rebellious angels. War propaganda existed 3 or so years ago, so Enoch could be 10% memory, 90% theology, and still be useful for historians if you know how to separate them. Third delivery, where modern engineering stalls. Let's be direct. Baalbek, 3 blocks of 800 tons, transported 800 meters, raised 6 meters, fitted with precision, without industrial iron, without complex documented pulley systems. The conventional explanation, brute force, unlimited time, lost lever techniques. Plausible? Yes. Complete? No, because even modern engineers, when trying to replicate at scale, encounter difficulty. In 1995, a Japanese team tried to build an 18-meter pyramid using ancient techniques. They failed. They had to use modern cranes. Pumapunku, andesite blocks, hardness 6-7 on the Mohs scale, with straight cuts, 90-degree angles, and Lego-like fittings. Andesite is not cut with bronze. It's cut with harder tools than itself, iron, steel, diamond. But Tiwanaku had no iron in quantities. So how? 2 hypotheses. Either they used abrasive sand with copper saws, slow wear, but possible, or they had knowledge of bronze hardening with elements we still haven't identified. Or, the third option, the site is more recent than we date it, and iron was available. But carbon-14 dating of associated organic material points to 500-600 AD. Giza. The question isn't whether the Egyptians built it. They did. The question is how they maintained logistics for 20 years without collapse. Herodotus, writing 2 or years later, says that 100,000 Sarmen worked in shifts of 3 months, fed by the state. Possible. But where are the detailed administrative records? We know Egyptians were obsessed with bureaucracy. We have papyri of censuses, taxes, rations, but no papyrus details the construction of the Great Pyramid. Why? It could be lost. It might be buried somewhere unexplored. Or it may be that the construction was so exceptional that even they didn't know how to document it adequately. Göbekli Tepe, the most disturbing of all, because it flips everything. Before Göbekli, the model was agriculture, surplus, hierarchy, monumental construction. Göbekli says, monumental construction, organized religion, settlement, agriculture. This means religion, not economics, was the engine of civilization. And if religion is the engine, what exactly did they believe justified erecting 20-ton pillars without immediate material return? The honest answer is, we don't know. But we know that whatever it was strong enough to mobilize hundreds of people for decades. So here's the synthesis. Ancient engineering is not impossible. It's improbable with the means we assume. And this means either our assumptions about available means are wrong, or there was lost knowledge, or we underestimated human capacity under extreme religious motivation. Now let's move to the final 3 scenarios, with honest pros and cons. Scenario A, Nephilim as metaphor, dark allegory for human power. Pros, resolves the theological problem of angels procreating, compatible with modern rabbinic Jewish reading, explains texts without needing the supernatural. Cons, doesn't explain why the metaphor is so geographically consistent, doesn't explain why and also afterward matters, doesn't explain why texts provide specific measurements, Og's bed, Goliath's height. It doesn't explain why megaliths appear exactly where giant narratives are strongest. Scenario B, Nephilim as memory of a robust population, Neanderthals, Denisovans, or tall human lineage. Pros, genetics confirms that modern humans interbred with Neanderthals and Denisovans. Neanderthals were more robust, with denser bone structure. A sapiens-Neanderthal encounter would have generated conflict and interbreeding. Narratives of giants could be distorted memories of these encounters. Cons, Neanderthals went extinct 40 Sauerzahn years ago. Biblical texts are from 3 Sauerzahn years ago. Oral memory doesn't preserve detail for 37 Sauerzahn years. Moreover, Neanderthals were not giants. They were shorter than sapiens, only more robust. Scenario C, Nephilim as a real human lineage, genetically tall, which existed and went extinct. Pros, could explain why texts are specific, could explain why anomalous skeletons were reported, even if not preserved, could explain why legends persist. Cons, no confirmed skeletons, no DNA, no genetic evidence of a human lineage consistently over 5 meters tall. Cases of gigantism exist, but they are pathological, not hereditary in a stable manner. Which scenario is most likely? Honestly, none of them alone. The real answer is probably a mix of all 3. perhaps there were tall populations, B, that were mythified, A, and memory of those populations was preserved in texts that we now read as literal, but that were half literal, half symbolic for the authors, C, perhaps Nephilim started as a name for elite warriors, turned into a lineage, became a myth, and in the process absorbed memories of encounters with different populations, including the last Neanderthals or Denisovans that survived in isolated regions longer than we thought. This answer may not be satisfying. I know, you want definitive, but definitive would require evidence we do not have. Complete skeletons, ancient DNA, detailed contemporary inscriptions. And perhaps that evidence exists, buried, waiting. Or perhaps not. Perhaps what we have is all we will ever have. Texts, megaliths, and the space between them where interpretation happens. Now, what to do with this? 3 paths. First, ignore. Decide that, without definitive evidence, the subject isn't worth the time. Second, choose a side and defend it tooth and nail, ignoring what doesn't fit. Third, keep the question open, update as new evidence appears, and accept the discomfort of not knowing. I suggest the third, because history is not static. Archaeology discovers new things every year. Genetics is constantly rewriting the human family tree. In 2010, we didn't know Denisovans existed. Today, we know they interbred with sapiens and left genes in Melanesians and Australian Aborigines. In 2015, we didn't know Homo naledi existed. Today, we know it lived in South Africa 0 years ago and had a small brain, but used fire and buried its dead. What will we know in 2030, 2040? So the question isn't, did Nephilim exist? The question is, are we willing to revise what we think we know when new data appears? And many are not, because revision is uncomfortable, because it means admitting you were wrong. And nobody likes to admit they are wrong, especially when the error is published, taught, institutionalized. But science advances through revision. Newton was wrong about gravity being an instantaneous force. Einstein corrected him with relativity. Einstein was wrong about the cosmological constant. Hubble corrected by showing that the universe expands. Nobody calls Newton or Einstein a fraud for being wrong. They were right with the information available. Later, the information changed. So here's the final, crucial question. When new information changes about Nephilim, megaliths, or ancient cultures, will you change your mind? Or have you already decided and now only seek confirmation? Because the pattern we've seen, texts, megaliths, global legends, does not go away. It's there. And 3 options remain: lost techniques, underestimated contact, or forgotten event population. And until we have a better answer, the most intellectually honest position is something happened that we still don't fully understand. That's not defeat, it's humility. And humility is not weakness. It's recognition that history has 200,000 years for sapiens, or 5 million for Homo habilis, and we only have written records for 5,000 years. So 9% of human history is prehistory. It's oral, it's lost, it's inferred from stone and bone. And stone and bone do not tell a complete story, they tell fragments. And fragments are what we have. Fragmented texts, Genesis 6, 4 verses. Megaliths without instruction manuals, legends that rhyme but do not prove. And in the midst of this, a question that refuses to die: why have we forgotten so much? Why does each civilization seem to start from scratch, rediscovering fire, the wheel, metallurgy, astronomy? Why is knowledge so fragile? The answer is that knowledge is not fragile. It survives in those who practice, teach, copy. But when you stop practicing, when writing is lost, when temples burn, when invaders kill priests, knowledge dies in a generation. So perhaps the Nephilim, whoever they are just another item on the list of things we knew and forgot. Perhaps they were real, or perhaps they were myth, but the pattern is the same. Something existed, was important, and was reduced to fragment. And it's up to us to decide whether to investigate the fragment or to pass over it. If you've made it this far, you've chosen to investigate. And this already puts you in the minority, because the majority prefers quick, comfortable answers. Giants are myth. Megaliths are just stones. Ancient texts are primitive, all solved. But you didn't want an easy resolution. You wanted a chain of evidence. So here's my commitment to you. As long as there's new evidence, new patterns, academic revisions, we will continue investigating. Without selling conspiracy theories, without ignoring inconvenient data, just honest inquiry. If that interests you, if you want more content like this, where we don't sell answers, just build the case and let you decide, subscribe, turn on notifications, and share with someone who values critical thinking. Because the channel grows when the community grows, and a thinking community goes further. So what remains? This. Nephilim, literal or metaphorical, mark a point. The point where the human looks at the superhuman and tries to understand. whether that superhuman is an angel, a giant, lost technology, or simply human capacity when driven by faith, fear, or ambition. And what remains is the question that texts, stones, and legends compel us to ask: how much of what we think is impossible is truly impossible? And how much is just improbable until someone proves otherwise? Because in the end, every discovery begins with someone asking, what if? What if the texts preserve real memory? What if megaliths required techniques we lost? What if giants were in some way real, not as monsters, but as populations, lineages, events that official history simplified into folklore? We don't know, not yet. But the fact that we don't know doesn't mean it's not worth asking. And the next question is, if Nephilim mark a global pattern, what else is marked that we still don't see? That remains for the next investigation.